Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel and thank you for joining me for another true crime video. And this one's bananas. So in the summer of 1984, the human remains of a young woman were discovered in several garbage bags near Solna, north of Stockholm, Sweden. 3 weeks later, another bag of human remains belonging to the same woman were found less than a mile away. Through fingerprints, the woman would be identified as 28-year-old Catrine de Costa. And the cause of death for this victim was never able to be determined because her head and internal organs were missing. But a series of disappearances and murders that followed were suspected to be connected to this first case, Catrine's case. Now, not only did the brutality and violence of Catrine's murder shock Sweden as a whole, but with every new development, the shock and sensationalism grew, culminating with the arrest and trial of two well-respected doctors who had been implicated in what has become known as the stickmordet, or the cutting-up murder. In 1984, when Catrine was murdered, these two men were young, bright medical professionals who were both rising in their careers. 4 years later, they were on trial for murder. This case was so impactful that author Stieg Larsson used it as inspiration for his best-selling 2005 novel, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, which in Sweden was actually titled Men Who Hate Women. So there's a story behind this because from a very young age, Larsson has been vocal about violence against women, having witnessed the rape of his friend Lisbeth at the hands of 3 men when he was just 15 years old. And apparently this was incredibly traumatic for him for more than one reason. And he carried a lot of guilt because he didn't step in to do anything. He was just 15. He didn't know what to do. He stood by and watched it happen. And his friend Lisbeth never forgave him for this, even though he apologized, he felt terrible, and he just felt completely full of guilt and shame about not doing something. Even though, let's be honest, a 15-year-old kid against 3 grown men, what's he going to do? He'd get his ass kicked and she would still be attacked. I guess he could have run and got help, but we don't know the circumstances. Either way, as an adult journalist, Larsson spent years investigating cases involving violence against women in Sweden, and the murder of Catrine de Costa caught his attention because of how horrific it was. So in his novel, he included storylines that would shine a light on the horrible violence against women that was happening in his country, which is and was a place that promotes itself as being safe with low crime rates. Sweden really does, perpetuate or put forward this image of being populated by well-mannered, law-abiding, nice people, and for the most part, I do think that's true, but every country has its issues. So this case is going to take us all on a ride, an almost unbelievable journey into the underbelly of Stockholm society. So grab a snack or pour yourself a hot cup of coffee because we're going to be together for a while today, and I want you to be comfortable. But before we dive in, let's have a word from the sponsor of today's video, Blueland. Did you know that each year Americans throw away 25% more trash from Thanksgiving to New Year's? Plastic was once meant to last forever, but most of it now is only used once, and much of this plastic enters our oceans, leading to toxic effects for everyone. We're eating a credit card's worth of plastic every single week, and 90% of the water we drink and the food we eat contains microplastics. Plastic has been found in 100% of marine turtles, 59% of whales, 36% of seals, and 40% of seabird species examined. And by 2050, scientists predict that the ocean will contain more plastic by weight than fish, which is crazy. So this year, let's do better. Let's turn our resolutions to actual actions by switching to Blueland. Blueland's mission is to make it easy to be eco-friendly with innovative products in reusable packaging, and these products are convenient, effective, and affordable. Their products are people and planet friendly because they have no plastic waste, and all their products are free of phosphates, chlorine, bleach, parabens, VOCs, ammonia, triclosan, and phthalates. They're also hypoallergenic and sourced from vegan and non-GMO ingredients. They use no single-use plastic in any of the components, whether it's their bottles, tablets, even their wrapping and shipping materials. And listen, Blue Land makes a bunch of different products, but I want to focus on their cleaning products because they have a bunch of amazing things. So they have these tablets. Blue Land has all different types of tablets. They've got tablets for washing your dishes, for your laundry, for your toilet bowl cleaning, just for regular cleaning solution. And the tablets come in these cute tins that you can store them in. These are also tins you can reuse when you order refills for your tablets instead of getting whole new plastic packaging. And Blue Land products are effective and affordable, with tablet refills starting at just $2.25. You can save even more by buying bulk refills or setting up a subscription, which is customized and convenient so you never run out of your most loved and most well-used products. Blue Land also has these spray cleaners. They have a Clean Essentials kit, which I would start off with personally because it comes with hand soap, a multi-surface cleaner, bathroom cleaner, and a glass and mirror cleaner. And when you need a refill, all you have to do, it's so simple, so easy, and fun. Honestly, for me, it's fun. Is you're going to order your refills, you're going to have your Glass Forever bottle, and when you get the new refills, all you have to do is fill your Glass Forever bottle with warm to hot water, drop one of the tablets in, and within a few minutes, it's ready to go. You can just start cleaning. No shaking or stirring required. So I received all of these cleaners and the hand soap in the scent Lemon Perrine. I love how it smells. I love how it feels. It doesn't dry my hands out. And I do really love the feel of their Glass Forever bottle in my hand. I like that in my cupboard, all the bottles look clean and uniform, which is a great aesthetic. And best of all, the products actually do get the job done. Blue Land's dishwasher tablets are proven to perform on baked-in stains, no rinse aid needed. Their laundry tablets are proven to lift the toughest stains out of clothes, even grass and food stains, and their toilet tablets work on a wide range of toilet stains, including rust, mineral deposits, limescale, and hard water. So I think a lot of times people believe that if there's not these harsh chemicals in their cleaners, they're not going to get the job done, but Blue Land does get the job done. And I think that you will love Blue Land and their products, and you're going to feel great about all the single-use plastic you're not adding to a landfill somewhere. So check them out for yourself. All you have to do is click the link in the description box below to get 15% off of your first kit. Blue Land is sharing this special offer just for all of you out there watching. I highly suggest you take advantage of it. Remember, click the link in the description box and you're going to get 15% off your first Blue Land kit. Go check it out now. Thank you so much to Blue Land for sponsoring today's video, and let's dive in. So as a heads up, when we're talking about cases that are happening in other countries, there's going to be certain words, names of places, things like that, that I'm not going to pronounce 100% correctly. But understand I'm always doing my very best. Feel free to correct me in the comment section so that I know the correct pronunciation. I always look it up online and then listen to the people saying it, but every video you get of people saying the word, it's slightly different. So I just try to find the happy medium, and it's usually wrong, but just bear with me. I'm doing my best. I promise. I'm not trying to insult Sweden or the language that is spoken there. I am doing my best. So Stockholm is the capital city of Sweden, and it is the largest urban area in the Nordic countries. And it's the most populated city in Sweden. Initially settled in the Stone Age, it became a city in 1252, and today Stockholm is the cultural, media, political, and economic center of the country. And it is a reality of life that most big cities around the world, like Stockholm, have their own red light district. And things happen in these areas in the dead of night that maybe the people who took part in those things happening, they might want to banish from their memories in the light of day. Red light districts often deal with sex work, drugs, just, the things that aren't necessarily acceptable in polite society. I'm trying to say things in a PC way, but you know what I mean. But what's interesting is until 1999, it was legal in Sweden to buy and sell sex. But then a 1999 law made it illegal to pay for sexual services, although it was still legal to sell these services. And that might not make sense to you, right? Because it doesn't technically make sense. You're like, well, why would you sell something if it's illegal to buy this thing, right? But the whole thought process behind this law was that sex work was becoming very prolific in Sweden. It was becoming a problem, I suppose. And the government in Sweden wanted to discourage male customers from soliciting sex workers with the hopes of reducing the customer base, thus dropping the demand, which would in turn hopefully reduce the supply and cut down on the high incidences of women who were desperate for money, putting themselves in unsafe situations. However, before the law was passed, the area of Malmskillensgatan was frequented by a lot of men, hoping to gain some female companionship for the night or even for just an hour. Malmskillensgatan is a 600-meter-long raised street in the city center, overlooking Alstermalm on one side and Kulturhuset on the other, and it has functioned as Stockholm's red light district since the 1970s and 80s. And the street's isolation from the bustling shops and businesses in other areas of the city made it the prime place to prowl after dark, or sometimes brazenly in the light of day, to choose from dozens of women standing on the street selling their wares. And this is where 28-year-old Catrine de Costa was last seen on the street on the evening of June 10th, 1984, during the Pentecost, which is a religious holiday celebrated in Sweden and other places. Catrine de Costa had faced one setback after another in life, and these roadblocks would not lead to her having a successful future or even a happy one. She became addicted to heroin while she was still in high school, and this drug dependency eventually led to Catrine becoming homeless for a time, which led to her participating in sex work to not only survive, but to fund a growing drug habit. And for a minute there, it seemed that Catrine had turned her life around after she moved to Portugal in 1979, and she met a local man. She fell in love, they got married, and they had a son. Sadly, Catrine could not drop her drug habit for an extended period of time. And within no time, she was leaving her husband and her son and heading back to Stockholm, where she returned to engaging in sex work on the streets. And according to some of Catrine's colleagues, as her need for her drug of choice increased in intensity as she became more addicted and more dependent, Catrine made some decisions that went against a human need for self-preservation. All the girls working the Malmskillensgatan area were aware of the regular Johns who would stop by habitually, and this meant that they were also aware of the men who should be avoided, whether these men had a habit of being too rough or they would fail to pay. They basically had a blacklist of clients that all the girls knew to avoid like the plague. However, desperate for money, to fuel her growing drug habit, Catrine began taking on clients that she and others in her profession knew to be, kind of sketchy and not completely safe. Catrine was last seen getting out of a man's vehicle on Malmskillensgatan, and then she vanished without a trace. Now, many of the girls who would work with her on the streets didn't think much of it. I guess the whole idea and kind of energy at that time was one less girl out there selling herself, poaching clients, would just be less competition for them. And in general, Catrine and, the other women too would be known to sort of disappear for a couple of days or a week. Catrine went to Portugal in the 70s and didn't come back for, over a year. So this wasn't out of the ordinary. Nobody really thought something nefarious had happened to her. But after a few days of not hearing from Catrine, her mother called the police and reported her daughter missing. Now, because most of this reporting is done in, languages other than English, I wasn't really able to get a good idea of what Catrine's relationship with her mother was like. Obviously, we know Catrine got into drugs when she was in high school. This led to her becoming homeless, so obviously there was an estrangement at some point, or she was just too ashamed to go home because she didn't want her mother to see her like that. But either way, it looked like at least Catrine and her mother would be staying in contact somehow, to the point where if the mother didn't hear from Catrine for a few days, this did raise an alarm bell for her, and she called the police. And they started to investigate, but they couldn't find Catrine anywhere. But roughly a month later, on July 18th, 1984, the remains of a woman were found in garbage bags near Solna, which is north of Stockholm. The location where these garbage bags were found was also very close to the Department of Forensic Medicine at the Karolinska Institute. Now, aside from the human remains in the garbage bags, a blue towel with strands of hair on it was found very close to these garbage bags at the scene. So initially in July, the police had a few garbage bags with human remains inside of them. And obviously, because there's more than one garbage bag, we know that this body was not intact. It had been cut up. So these bags are holding body parts, right? So then on August 1st, 27-year-old sex worker Kristina Kravace was found nude and dismembered under a bridge leading to the suburb of Sollentuna, which is north of Stockholm. 7 days later, on August 8th, more human remains were found in garbage bags less than a mile away from the first location. All in all, 6 black garbage bags were found with human body parts inside of them. All of these garbage bags contained the human remains of the same person, and that person would later be identified through fingerprints as the missing Catrine de Costa. Now, at the Karolinska Institute, a doctor named Tiet Herm performed an autopsy on Catrine, and he was able to reconstruct her body, put it back together as much as possible, considering that her head was missing, along with one of her breasts, her genitalia, and many of her internal organs. Dr. Herm also examined the remains of Kristina Kravace, and he determined that, in his opinion, both women had been handled in the same way. They had been sexually assaulted, murdered, and then mutilated. Not long after, another sex worker, 26-year-old Annika Morse, was found dead in Hagenston Park, and Dr. Herm once again performed the autopsy and found that she also had been raped before her murder and mutilated afterwards. It was his opinion that the dismemberment had been done in a professional manner by someone who must have had medical training, and then suddenly Stockholm, Sweden, had their very own Jack the Ripper. Now, this brings us to a little twist in our story, because in November of 1984, a woman named Maureen Catherine Harriet Falk, who was a reporter for the Swedish news program Rapport, she went missing along with her close friend, Lena Grans. Now, at the time of her disappearance, Falk was investigating a scandal involving weapons smuggling from Sweden to communist states in Eastern Europe. And shortly before her disappearance, Falk had told her fiancé that she was onto something big, and that when her story finally broke, she would get the Swedish Grand Prize for journalism. The last time either of these women was seen was on the evening of November 18th at a restaurant in Stockholm where they had dinner and shared a bottle of wine before leaving. That night they had plans to meet up with a friend at Cafe Opera, but Falk and Grans never arrived. Although neither of these two women were known sex workers, it was believed that law enforcement initially suspected their disappearances may be connected to the previous mysterious deaths and missing persons of other Stockholm women, which led to rumors and speculations that the police had a serial killer on their hands. This speculation increased when 3 more women, Lena Bofors, Lena Mason, and Lotta Svensson, all vanished at the end of 1984. And the crazy part is, one of them was last seen at the police station. Lena Bofors had visited the police station claiming to have information about the sex workers who'd gone missing and turned up dead, and she claimed the murders had been committed by a group of people who were kind of high up and powerful in the city. Lena claimed that she knew the identities of some of these individuals, and she stated that one of them worked closely with the police. The last time anyone saw Lena Bofors, she was walking out of the police station after reporting this, and then she was gone. While all of this was going on, the police were also made aware of a startling accusation brought to them by a woman named Christina Algen. Christina claimed that her husband, a doctor, a general practitioner named Thomas Algen, had been sexually molesting their 17-month-old daughter. Now, at the time, Christina and Thomas were in the middle of a very contentious separation, which was heading at breakneck speed down the path to divorce. And a pediatric examination of the young girl, who we're going to call Karen, that showed no signs of abuse. So no further investigative steps were taken at that time. But no one knew in that moment that Dr. Thomas Algian had a connection to Dr. Teet Harem, the very same man who had performed the autopsy on Catrine de Costa and some of the other women who showed up dead. But there was one person putting some of the puzzle pieces together, and that was a man named Rolf. And this was Dr. Harem's own father-in-law. Rolf had been watching the news as body after body turned up, and he had a very strong suspicion that his son-in-law, Teet Harem, was responsible in some way. Rolf called the police and told them that his son-in-law had some very strange and worrisome tendencies. It appeared that Dr. Teet Harem really seemed to enjoy violent adult films, if you know what I mean when I say adult films. And reportedly, he was a frequent visitor to Stockholm's red light district. And Teet Harem's father-in-law was like, listen, my daughter, Catrine, she died 2 years ago in 1982. And the police said it was a suicide, but I believe that her husband and my son-in-law, Teet Harem, was responsible. I believe that Teet Harem murdered my daughter, Catrine. So a local paper would write about how when Teet and Catrine were first married, he was an in-law's dream. He was a doctor. He was smart, brilliant, actually. He was charming, certainly a good provider, but, quote, later the picture would change. He became a more and more assiduous visitor to Malmskillgaten. There he would pick up prostitutes, but his wife continued to stand by him, although, as far as the police could make out, she knew about his double life. End quote. Catrine's mother claimed that when she saw a picture of Catrine de Costa in the papers, she recognized the young woman. She said that she had seen Catrine at her daughter's funeral 2 years prior. Rolf also revealed that his daughter and Teet's wife had died in January of 1982. So what happened to Teet Harem's wife, Catrine? Well, in January of 1982, 24-year-old Catrine had been found dead in the apartment she shared with her husband. Apparently, she'd been dressed for a night out when her body was found with a ligature around her neck hanging from the side of her bed. Although Catrine's death had been ruled a suicide, it wasn't just her father, Rolf, who suspected Teet Harem had been involved in some way. The detectives on the case had been suspicious of Catrine's husband, who they described as being indifferent and callous about his wife's death. And Rolf told the police that he believed Dr. Harem had killed Catrine because she was trying to get a divorce from him. Dr. Harem's behavior after Catrine's death was also kind of bizarre. Within no time, he had a new girlfriend, and there were a lot of reports that said he had been dating or seeing this woman before Catrine died. And just weeks after his wife's death, Dr. Harem published his first paper on strangulation, which was actually cited in the Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence Investigation and Prosecution of Strangulation Cases. So basically, the paper was about how you can tell the difference between somebody who, took their own life by strangulation or somebody who was strangled by another person, somebody who was murdered. So how can you tell the difference when somebody has a ligature around their neck? Did they do it themselves or did somebody else do it for them? Teet Harem had also written an article on strangulation and hanging deaths a month after his wife died. And reportedly, when he handed the article to the editor of the paper, Dr. Teet Harem made a very dark joke, saying, quote, "This is very topical for me just now." End quote. Definitely dark, definitely odd, definitely out of place. People mourn in their own ways, though, right? So we can't really say too much about it. We have to sort of just look at the body of evidence here, and that's just going to be one of the weird things that Teet Harem does and says. So by 1984, when Catrine de Costa died, Dr. Harem was 30 years old, and even though he was so young, he was really a rising star in his field. He'd already been published several times. He was invited to speak at multiple international conferences about his new area of expertise, which was death by strangulation. And by this time, he'd become the go-to person for law enforcement to consult when it came to murders and unexplained deaths in Stockholm. He was well respected and on his way up the ladder in his career, to the point where, because he was working at the ME's office, they did a lot to keep him there because I guess promising doctors are hard to keep in the sort of medical examiner's field. They sort of go on to start writing papers or do their own thing. And Dr. Harem was so brilliant, so talented, so good at what he did that the Karolinska Institute did a lot to keep him employed there. But it was purely because of his skill and his talent and his brilliance. It certainly wasn't because Dr. Teet Harem was the funnest guy at a party. Not only did Harem's in-laws find him to be a little bit suspicious and concerning, but even his own friends and colleagues described him as being kind of odd, cold, arrogant, and downright creepy sometimes. He had a tendency of inviting friends over. He'd be like, hey, come on over. We'll have dinner. We'll play charades. We'll drink some wine. We'll have a great time. But then he would spend the night walking them through postmortems that he had done, complete with graphic pictures that they didn't really want to see. And these friends and colleagues would say that Dr. Teet Harem would often just send them autopsy reports and, horrible graphic pictures, even though no one asked for him to do that. He just did it because it appeared to be something he was incredibly passionate about, almost as if it wasn't just his job or just his career. It was his hobby, his passion, his creative outlet, the thing that really got him going. He really got his engine revving, and people were a bit unsettled by that. Rightly so, understandably. So as part of their investigation into what had happened to Catrine de Costa, police began walking around the red light district with a series of photos to show the women who were still working on the street. And they basically had a bunch of photos of, men who were known to frequent that area, known sex criminals, things like that. But after speaking to Dr. Teet Harem's father-in-law, the police decided to include Harem's picture in that deck of pictures. And reportedly, at least 50 women in this red light district recognized Teet Harem, but they didn't know him by name and they didn't know he was a doctor because allegedly he had told them he was a photographer. One woman, her name was Lotta, she said that she was a regular of Dr. Teet Harem, and she said, quote, "The only strange thing about him was that he was so changeable. He was often nervous and had trouble concentrating. He seemed to be distracted somehow, but suddenly he could be quite different. In a moment, he would change and be self-confident and sure of himself. It was quite a transformation," end quote. This woman, Lotta, also spoke about one time when she'd been scared of Dr. Teet Harem, and she said, quote, "It happened out at Solna. We had intercourse, but he didn't want to pay. He had that self-confident, cocksure attitude. Suddenly, he slapped me in the face with the flat of his hand. Once, then again. Then I got frightened, but I still couldn't believe he was a murderer." End quote. Another woman told police that 2 months prior, Dr. Teet Harem had grabbed her by her throat and threatened her with a knife. And most of the women that police talked to also remembered the car that Teet Harem drove, a white VW Golf. And when police looked into what kind of car the doctor drove, they discovered it was the same vehicle. So I hope I'm not being confusing here. The women knew Dr. Teet Harem by, his picture. They knew him by sight. They thought he was a photographer. They didn't know his real name. They knew what kind of car he drove. So the police had to verify that they were speaking about the same person that they'd identified in the pictures by going and seeing what kind of car Dr. Harem drove, and it ended up being the same car that these women said this photographer, who sometimes scared them and had this sort of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde kind of personality, that's the car he drove. So now they knew that these women, these sex workers, were speaking about the same person. Now, at that point, police placed Dr. Teet Harem under surveillance. They began following him, and for 3 months, they watched him drive around picking up sex workers in his white VW. The police had also asked Dr. Harem's supervisor at the Karolinska Institute to perform another autopsy on Catrine's remains. This supervisor's name was Jovan Raj, and in November of 1984, he had formed an opinion on what had happened to Catrine. Weeks prior, when he'd been informed that Dr. Harem was a suspect, and that's why he was being asked to do another autopsy, Dr. Raj was in disbelief, but he seemed to have changed his mind after his examination. So initially, after he reviewed the notes from Dr. Haram's original autopsy, Dr. Raj felt that based on the incisions, the perpetrator could have been a butcher, and he even accompanied the police to a slaughterhouse to examine methods used for cutting up animals. But after he personally looked at Catrine's remains, Dr. Raj changed his mind, and he decided the incisions used had probably been made by someone who was skilled in human dissection, and he even said that it was very possible Dr. Teet Haram could have been responsible for making these incisions. And Dr. Raj said this based on being very familiar with Dr. Haram's work, because he really respected Dr. Haram and he often watched him work. He really thought that this guy was a talented doctor and he was familiar with the methods he used during autopsies. In a later interview with police, Dr. Raj said, quote, "I think that if you do not establish his guilt, you might as well all go and hang yourselves," end quote. It's kind of dramatic, but this was a very impactful statement for the police because they felt that if Dr. Raj, who was Haram's own colleague and supervisor, who respected Haram so much and was actually very friendly and on friendly terms with Haram, if Dr. Raj thought that Dr. Haram could be involved, the police felt, on top of all the other shady things that were going on with the good doctor, it was time to bring him in for questioning. All of these things were adding up. You've got Dr. Haram's father-in-law being like, yeah, I think he could be involved with this. I think he even killed my daughter. You've got Dr. Haram's own friends and colleagues being like, yeah, he's kind of creepy. He's really into cutting up people, and that's kind of weird. You have his own supervisor being like, yeah, this is possible, and if you don't establish his guilt, go hang yourselves. And the police were like, all right, we don't need to know anymore, right? So Dr. Teet Haram was arrested in early December of 1984. And those who stand in defense of him, which there are people still to this day who defend him, the public opinion on whether or not he was responsible for these murders is very split down the middle. But those who defend Dr. Haram will consistently point out that the police orchestrated this arrest in a way that would cause not only the maximum amount of embarrassment to Haram, but the maximum amount of publicity as far as like the media was concerned. So it was just after 8 a.m. Haram was at work sitting in the break room chatting with his coworkers over cups of coffee when two police officers came in. And they were not looking happy. They were angry looking, and they informed him that he was being taken to police headquarters, which was by Cronenberg Park. Now, it just so happened that Teet Haram's own mother, Vera, worked in that very same building. She'd been employed in the records division there for 15 years. So after Haram had been placed in a cell, the two detectives in his case called Vera into their office and informed her that her son had been arrested under suspicion of murder, but it wasn't just one murder he was being looked at for. They believed that not only was he responsible for brutally taking the lives of multiple women, but that he may have also been responsible for taking the life of his young wife 2 years prior. Now, Dr. Teet Haram's mother, Vera, quit her job that same day. Now, while Dr. Teet Haram was settling into his new temporary home, the police were positioned to enter his home and place of business to look for evidence. So Haram's office at the Department of Forensic Medicine was searched, and they found 3 human skulls placed on display in his bookshelves. These were taken into evidence since, remember, Catrine de Costa and other women had been found missing several body parts, including their heads. Haram's white VW Golf was parked outside of his office. That was also examined and processed by a forensics team, and other police officers went to a villa that Haram lived in with his girlfriend, Monica, which was located in Täby, Kärkby, which is north of Stockholm. Now, this is actually a really interesting place, even though I'm 100% sure I pronounced it incorrectly, but it doesn't matter because I have so much respect and interest in this area, because not only are there structures there still standing from the people that settled in this area during the Iron Age 2,000 years ago. Not only is there a beautiful medieval church that was built in the mid-13th century that is still standing there in beautiful condition, but apparently there's also this cool abandoned ghost town in the woods just outside of the town. So not only do I definitely want to visit this place, but maybe I can also do a strange and unusual video about it because it is super interesting. But anyways, back to the story we're here to tell today. Dr. Teet Haram and his young girlfriend Monica lived in this villa, and the police went there to search it. They were told to specifically look for pictures or negatives showing Catrine, which was Dr. Harem's wife, who'd passed away under mysterious circumstances in 1982. They were also told to look for Irish Green Hills blue terry towels and 45mm sealing tape, along with any trinkets or belongings that might be tied to Catrine Costa or any of the other sex workers who had gone missing and or turned up dead and dismembered. Items of evidence were collected, including some cameras, photograph albums, and photo slides. There were also some card games that had sexual and pornographic context, along with a copy of Hustler. There were some adult cartoons, a vibrator, and a leather whip. They also found a knife in a leather sheath, and strangely enough, reportedly, they found a doll with what has been described as an electric flex wrapped around her neck. Now, I don't know what an electric flex is. The best I could come up with when I was Googling it is that it's some sort of like electrician wire with kind of like a flexible material wrapped around it to keep the wire from fraying and to keep it flexible. I don't know exactly what it is. If anyone knows, tell me in the comments. Either way, I don't think it really matters because there was something wrapped around this doll's neck. And, well, that's weird. No matter which way you cut this banana nut bread, that's weird. I personally would find it odd to discover something like that in the room of a child, where a doll being present would make more sense, but to find it in the home of an adult man, a respected doctor who was in the process of building his career on being an expert on strangulation and sexual violence, it's red flag city over here. All right, but wait, there's more. Police also found 7 videotapes, 2 notebooks with titles of films in them, 3 bank books, which I think in the United States we call them checkbooks, 5 bottles of xylocaine, which is an anesthetic, a cervical vertebrae, which if anybody doesn't know, the cervical vertebrae is actually part of your neck, not like the cervix. So some people get that confused and they think that the cervical vertebrae might mean something that's like part of a woman's anatomy, but it's not. It's part of like your neck area. They also found an air pistol with ammunition and a photocopied post-mortem exam report from an autopsy that Dr. Teet Harem had performed on a sex worker 2 years prior. Like I said, from Teet's office, they also took those 3 skulls along with various books about prostitution. They found 3 restraints with all different types of knots, photographs, needles, and syringes, and a document case containing various men's magazines, which, once again, I hope you know what I mean when I say men's magazines. I'm not talking about like Car and Driver. You know what I mean? I'm not. Crime scene technicians collected the cushions and a mattress from the sofa in Dr. Teet Harem's office. They also collected a carton of documents labeled with the word sex and another carton labeled with the word digitals, as in, I believe, to be pictures. Now, in the doctor's white VW Golf, the police found, the typical things you'd find in a car: jumper cables, a tow line, ice scrapers, some parking tickets. But they also found several different tourist maps. They found a large green and white terry sheet with a $ pattern. They found a ticket from a porn shop called Sexorama, which had 3 car fuses taped to the back of it. They found a packet containing a pressure bandage. They found some first aid bandages and a blanket. But check this out. They also found a picture of a woman named Anna Mandsater. Anna was a Swedish murderer, and her story is super interesting as well. Like, I keep taking these side paths, but it's super interesting. So Anna was married to a farmer named Niels Nilsson, and they had a son together named Per Nilsson. When Niels died, Anna and her then 21-year-old son Per began running the farm together. But there were rumors around town that the mother and the son had a romantic relationship, if you know what I mean. So Anna arranged for her son Per to marry a young woman named Hannah Johannesdotter. Hannah would end up dead, and her mother-in-law would be accused of her murder. And it's a very interesting case. So let me know if you want me to do a video on it, because I really want to. But this dude, Teet Harem, had Anna's picture in his car, which once again is just weird. Because why? I guess Anna's case is considered to be one of Sweden's most prolific true crime cases, but was Teet a true crime fan? Was he listening to podcasts in the car while driving to work and he just wanted to know what Anna looked like? Like, he wanted to hold it up on his dash and look at her picture while he listened to the podcast? I'm being sarcastic because obviously it's 1984 and there's no true crime podcasts. But listen, it's just weird, okay? I don't even have pictures of things like this in my vehicle or in my office. And it would make more sense if I did because it's like my job, like maybe they're part of my files or maybe I was just on the go and researching a case. Why did he have her picture in his car? I don't know. It's never explained. And listen, so many of these things were never explained. We don't know what was in the boxes or the cartons that were labeled sex. We don't know what the police found ultimately on the cameras or in the photo albums, things like that. We haven't really gotten all that information, or at least if that information is out there, it's in a language that I cannot understand. And I do have a translation app, which I was able to use to translate PDFs and things like that. But there's a book. There's a book that has so much information on this case. And I was able to get 3 chapters of that book in English, but I could not get that book anywhere. I couldn't buy it used anywhere. It definitely wasn't on Amazon. There was an English version made, but I just can't find it. And how I wish I could, because I would love to know exactly what was in police evidence. But anyways, back at police headquarters, right after Dr. Teet Harum gets arrested, we've got Detective Alan Backstrom and his partner Lars Johnson questioning Teet Harum for 5 hours before his lawyer arrived. The tea was that Backstrom and Harum, although they'd worked together on many cases before, they really didn't like each other. Detective Backstrom felt that, Teet Harum was kind of overrated and his skill level didn't match the arrogance he always seemed to exude, and Dr. Teet Harum in turn found the police detective to be dull, a flat personality with no imagination. But according to reports, neither man let on during this police interview that they had absolutely no respect for the other. So Detective Backstrom and Johnson, they wanted to at first focus on what had happened to the young and beautiful Anna Catrine Harum in 1982. Teet was the one who'd found his wife dead in their bedroom, and although he had spoken to the police at the time of his wife's death, there were still unanswered questions, such as where had he been that evening before coming home? What exactly had happened when he'd returned home? Why did he wait so long to call the police? Most importantly, Teet claimed that he'd found a roll of film at the scene, and he told the police that he'd had those pictures developed, but they wanted to know what was in the pictures and where are the negatives. Now, once again, he does not answer these questions, at least in the police interviews that I saw transcribed. But all of this interest in pictures concerning Anne Catrine Harum is going to make sense, sort of, in a little bit. So Dr. Harum remained calm and stoic during this interrogation. He answered the questions directly, but he did not veer from his original story of 2 years prior. And he said he had nothing to do with what had happened to his wife, Anne Catrine. He said, sadly, she had a lot of issues, mental health issues. She had tried to take her own life more than once before. It just happened that night she finally succeeded. Finally, Dr. Harum was asked about Catrine de Costa, who had vanished on June 10th, 1984. This happened to be the Pentecost, which is a Christian holiday that marks the descent of the Holy Spirit upon the apostles on the 50th day after the resurrection of Jesus. Pentecost is a movable feast. That means it's observed exactly 7 weeks after Easter, so it can fall on different days in the year, depending on the year that you're in. And in 1984, it fell right on June 10th. Now, at that time in Sweden, the holiday would extend to the following Monday, which would create a sort of national break for everyone. Businesses and schools would be closed, and people would celebrate in their own ways. So Dr. Teet Harum was asked, what had he been doing during that holiday break? And Teet said he couldn't really remember because it had been so many months. But he said if he were to guess, if he had to say where he was at that time, he would have probably been in Täby, Kirkby, because he'd been in the process of building his villa at that time. Now, the police were aware also that Teet Harum was working on a drug addiction study. And ironically enough, and there's so much irony in this case that I don't know if it actually means anything or if it's just this weird, ironic thing. But ironically enough, Dr. Teet Harum was working on an addiction study concerning heroin, which also happened to be Catrine de Costa's drug of choice. So the police knew that he kept mice in a lab at the Department of Forensic Medicine at the Karolinska Institute, and he would go in and regularly inject these mice with heroin for research purposes. So Dr. Harem was asked if he'd done this at any point on that Sunday or Monday over the Pentecost holiday, and Dr. Teet Harem said he wasn't sure. He'd have to consult his research notes and get back to them. But Teet said he did remember that he and his supervisor, Jovan Raj, had completed a series of experiments just after the Pentecost holiday, and he and his girlfriend Monica had gone on a vacation for a week that same month. But other than that, he and Monica's father had mainly been at the site where their villa was being built, or he'd been at work. Next, Detective Backstrom asked Teet about how much time he spent driving around Malmskillsgatan, the red light district in Stockholm. The detective asked the doctor if he was there to pick up women, who he would then pay for sex, and Teet said absolutely not. He said he never did this. Now, of course, the police have been following him for several months, and they know that he has done this. They've seen him do this. And eventually, Dr. Harem admitted, yes, I did one time pay for sex, but it was only one time. It was in 1981. Me and my wife were fighting, and I, in anger and resentment and to get back at her, went to the red light district and hired a woman for her company. But that was it. It was only one time. Like I said, the police have been watching Teet Harem for 3 months. They'd seen him pick up women more than one time. They'd seen him pick up women multiple times, but they don't really reveal this at this time. They just know that he's lying, at least about his sexual habits. Dr. Harem was also asked about the autopsy he'd performed and helped perform on Catrine de Costa's remains, and Teet claimed that he didn't believe the method of dismemberment proved the killer had knowledge of anatomy or medical training. He said it seemed more like the skill of a hunter, a hunter who kills a deer or an animal in the wild and then has to break the body of this animal down in order to, butcher it and use it for food. Detective Backstrom then asked Teet if he felt that his supervisor, Jovan Raj, was good at his job. And Teet answered, quote, "I've always had the greatest confidence in Jovan, and I know that, without boasting, he's the best we have in this country in the field of forensic medicine. He is an extremely trustworthy diagnostician, and he has a breadth of experience like few others," end quote. So the police did this purposely, right? Because Dr. Jovan Raj is kind of the main person who was like, you got to arrest this guy and prove his guilt. And I guess that Teet wasn't aware at that time that his supervisor and friend had been one of the main people who pointed the finger of suspicion his way. But they wanted to know if Teet would be like, nah, he's kind of a hack. He's really not that good of his job. Like, I like him. He's a nice guy. He's my friend, my supervisor, but I'm way better at this than he is. So, don't trust what he says kind of thing. But he didn't do that. He said that Dr. Raj was like the best in like the world, right? Because Dr. Teet Harem was like, I've worked internationally. I've worked with a lot of medical examiners. I've worked with a lot of people who do autopsies, and Jovan's the best. So they did this intentionally to sort of put him in a corner. Now, Dr. Teet Harem remained in police custody for 5 days before being released. Now, although some of the items in his home and office had raised a few eyebrows, like that weird doll and the picture of the murderer in his car, none of it was actually enough to tie him to any murders, right? You can't blame a man if he's really into porn. You can't blame a man if he has a huge sexual appetite. You can't blame a man if he likes playing with dolls or is interested in murderers. I mean, you could blame him, but it doesn't make him a murderer, right? It's not evidence you can bring into court to prove that this doctor killed somebody. So at that time, the chief prosecutor, Anders Heelan, told the detectives, listen, we'll continue this investigation. We'll keep looking into it. But right now, we don't have sufficient grounds to keep Dr. Harem behind bars. So you gotta set him loose. Now, before the arrest of Dr. Teet Harem, the police have been pretty quiet about the details of their investigation, but when Teet was behind bars, the media started printing things that they only could have known if they had someone on the inside of the department or if the police were intentionally and knowingly feeding them information. The initial news reports that came out after Dr. Harem was arrested, they didn't reveal his name, but they provided enough details to make it easy to speculate on who the arrested suspect was, especially if you knew Dr. Teet Harem. The news report stated, quote, "A doctor in his 30s has been arrested on suspicion of murdering the 28-year-old woman whose dismembered body was found in plastic sacks last summer in Solna. He is also suspected of having killed his former wife in Stockholm in 1982. After several months of exhaustive investigation and searching for the body in the bag's murderer, a junior doctor was seized and arrested on Monday. The man was seized at his workplace in the Stockholm area," end quote. I mean, anybody who knew that Dr. Harem's wife had died in 1982 and that he was a junior doctor and worked in Stockholm would know exactly who they were talking about. When Teet Harem was released from prison, he was promptly fired from his job because the Board of Social Welfare said they could not have an employee who was suspected of such a serious crime. And when the news was put out about a young doctor in Stockholm being arrested under suspicion of murder, the police department received many calls and tips. And one of these was from Christina Algen, ex-wife of Dr. Thomas Algen. Now remember that Christina was the same person who called the police, I believe, the year prior, claiming that she was concerned that her young daughter was being molested by her doctor husband. And Christina had seen the news reports about this arrest, and she wanted to know if the person that they had in custody was Dr. Teet Harem. When Christina got confirmation that it was, she revealed something shocking. She said that her ex-husband knew Dr. Teet Harem. This was the same ex-husband that she'd reported for child abuse the year before. In fact, Dr. Thomas Algen had invited Teet and his girlfriend Monica over to their house for dinner in 1982, not long after the death of Catrine Harem. Christina said she had immediately disliked Dr. Harem. There was just something off about him, something that rubbed her the wrong way. And after he and his girlfriend Monica had left, she told her husband that he was not to be an invited guest to their home ever again. Christina now revealed to the police that she believed Teet had been responsible for Catrine de Costa's death, and she suspected that her ex-husband had been involved as well. Not only that, Christina had recently heard things from her young daughter, Karen, which led her to believe that this child had been present when Catrine de Costa was dismembered. The young girl claimed that she'd been with her father and Dr. Harem when she watched a woman be cut up with a saw, and then the child had started carrying around a headless doll, claiming this doll was the woman who had been cut up because that woman did not have a head. The following spring, another investigation began into Dr. Thomas Algen's alleged abuse of his daughter, Karen. Under questioning, Dr. Algen admitted that he sometimes played games with his daughter that might be considered inappropriate, but he once again denied sexually abusing her, and he was released. I'm not sure what kind of games you'd be playing with your young daughter, your 2-year-old daughter, that would be considered inappropriate. But okay, let's move on. The police did bring in both a child psychologist and a child psychiatrist to speak to Karen and figure out whether there was any truth to what she was saying or if the memories had been planted in her head by her mother because her mother was, going through this divorce and really hated Dr. Thomas Algen. But psychiatrist Frank Lindblad and psychologist Margaretha Eriksson submitted a report to the police stating that they believed Karen did in fact witness the dismemberment of Catrine de Costa. And little Karen was saying that the murder had been done at the coroner's office on the autopsy table over the Pentecost holiday. So we're going to leave Catrine de Costa for a second, and we're going to go back to another incident that I referred to earlier, because on May 29th, 1985, a car registered to a woman named Lena Grans was found submerged in water under Hammarby Dock in southern Stockholm. This vehicle was discovered during a military diving exercise, even though the police allegedly had searched that same area, even the water, at least 6 times. Now, inside the car were the skeletonized remains of Lena Grans and her journalist friend, Maureen Catherine Harriet Felk. They were both dressed in the same clothes they'd last been seen in at that restaurant when they had dinner and shared a bottle of wine, and they both still had their seatbelts fastened. And even though it was Lena's car, Maureen Felk was in the driver's seat. Now, this is a mystery all on its own because something doesn't add up about their deaths. After playing with several theories, the police decided that Felk had been practicing her driving when she accidentally drove into the water and then the 2 women drowned. I guess that Felk had just gotten her driver's license. Police police felt she'd been practicing her driving when the car started going too fast down a slope before hitting a guardrail and flipping over into the water. Both of the women were wearing high heels when their bodies were found, and I guess in Sweden, this is a driving offense. It's not technically illegal, like you can't be arrested for it, but you can be ticketed for it. Something about it being dangerous because you can get your heel stuck under the pedals. But let me ask you this. If you drove your car into water and you were conscious, don't you think you would unbuckle your seatbelt and try to get out? You wouldn't just sit there buckled in, waiting for the car to slowly sink beneath the water, right? That doesn't make a lot of sense. And there were a lot of other odd details that made these women's death look like maybe it wasn't an accident. Lena Grans did have a broken nose, but Maureen Falk had no broken bones or head injuries, and pink water was found in their lungs, but the water was apparently never tested, and no one ever explained why the water in their lungs would be pink. Color scrapings were found on the car. I believe that to mean as in paint from another car, but it doesn't seem that these scrapings were ever analyzed. Since 1985, the police theory of how this car flipped into the water has been disproven because they figured out if the car had hit the guardrail and flipped over, it would have to move 550 meters while on the bottom of the canal to be located in the area that it was found. And according to harbor employees, the water in that specific canal had no currents, which is one of the main reasons they chose it as a harbor because of the lack of currents. And the bottom is very muddy and sticky. So the car itself had broken windows and it would not have moved along the bottom of the harbor. It would have sunk and then gotten stuck in that sticky mud, and there would be no currents to help push it along. So it just didn't really make sense, that version of the story, that the car flipped over the guardrail. I don't believe they ever found any indication on the guardrail that a car had hit it and flipped over. If there was any sign of damage to the guardrail, which would be, I think, pretty extensive, right? If a car slammed into it going pretty fast and then flipped over it, you'd see paint from that car on the guardrail. The guardrail would probably be banged up, maybe even bent. And if that had been the case when these two women went missing, you'd think the police would have noticed that then and been like, hey, maybe their car hit this guardrail and went into the water, but that didn't happen. So this case actually went cold for over a decade before new information came out in 1997 when the Swedish Secret Service received an anonymous letter that allegedly was sent from Germany. And this letter claimed that the East German secret police were responsible for the deaths. And the letter writer named 2 Stasi officials. Stasi is basically just what the East Germany secret police are called. So this letter writer named 2 Stasi officials and 4 East German government officials as being involved in these deaths. Apparently, the journalist Maureen Falk had gotten her hands on some sensitive information about a secret weapons deal between a Swedish manufacturer, Bofors, and East Germany. Isn't it interesting, once again, ironic, that the manufacturing company that was selling, guns and things to East Germany was the same name as that one woman that went missing after she went to the police and reported that she knew about a group in Stockholm who was responsible for killing these sex workers. Because remember, her name was Lena Bofors. Once again, maybe just a coincidence, but ironic and weird. But this letter also asserted that the East German secret police were responsible for the death of a man named Carl Algernon, who was a Swedish weapons inspector. And he was also the chief investigator in what would eventually be called the Bofors scandal. So there's a lot more to this story. It goes deep. It's full of espionage and drama. But once again, that's not the story we're here to tell today. So let's get back to it. I just wanted to give you a little closure on what happened to Maureen and Lena. Very sad, but probably not an accident. Just going to say that. And it's actually quite appropriate that I took a pause and a side quest there, because that's exactly what the police in Stockholm did with Catrine de Costa's case at the start of 1986, when all law enforcement resources were channeled to another crime that was perceived as being far more important and urgent. On February 28, 1986, the Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme was assassinated while leaving a movie theater with his wife. His killer was never caught, mainly because it was so difficult to pinpoint who would have wanted him dead, since he wasn't everyone's favorite person by any means. During his time as prime minister, Palm had made an enemy out of South Africa. He had created tensions with the United States as he was outspoken against the war in Vietnam, and he was publicly supporting Fidel Castro in Cuba, which meant that even the regular people in Cuba were like, is this guy serious? You don't know how bad it is here, So just people in general were not super big fans of not only some of his points of view, but the way that he communicated. I guess he was a very bold, aggressive speaker. He didn't mince words. He didn't sweeten the truth in the name of politics. Overall, although he may have had a hot take here and there, Olof Palme was actually a really decent person. As far as I can tell, he seemed to care about people. He was passionate about human rights. But there are those who don't appreciate honesty. And there are those who don't appreciate an attempt to do the right thing and change the world for the better. So there are theories and speculations about who was responsible, including the CIA in the United States. But the case is technically not solved, although a lot of people believe they know who did it. However, it's very easy to understand how much of the police presence in Sweden, and especially in Stockholm, where the assassination happened, they would be given to Palme's death. And it wasn't until 1987 when police finally turned their attention back to Catrine de Costa. And they now had a report from 2 mental health professionals that claimed young Karen Algen had in fact witnessed a horrific crime against Catrine de Costa. And Karen was also alleging that her father and his friend, Dr. Tiet Herm, would eat the eyes of their victims and drink their blood. And this led to these 2 doctors being referred to as the vampire doctors, the vampire killers, the cannibal killers, things like that. We're going to talk about that in a second. In the fall of 1987, a married couple who owned a photo shop very close to the Karolinska Institute, they came forward to the police and they described a strange incident that had happened in the summer of 1984. They said that 2 men, well-dressed, well-spoken men, had come into their shop with a roll of film to be processed. And these men told the shop employees that what was on this roll of film was super-duper top secret, part of a classified police investigation. Allegedly, the pictures that were developed shocked this couple and the people who worked for them. There were photos of body parts being cut up and even pictures of someone wearing bloody clothes after this person allegedly did the cutting up of the bodies. So the police brought the couple into the station and they did a lineup. And in the lineup, there was, a bunch of random people, but there was also Dr. Thomas Algen and Dr. Tiet Herm. And reportedly, the couple that owned the photo shop pointed out both doctors very quickly. Well, they pointed out Dr. Thomas Algen very quickly, but they were not 100% certain of Tiet Herm's identification. According to lawyers' reports, quote, Tiet was identified only by the wife and then only after much hesitation. It was unclear if she identified Tiet as the person who had been to their shop or the person in one of the pictures. She seemed to have been guided to this answer by reactions from the police officer present. Her first choice was another person. The husband wrongly pointed out one of the police officers as having been to their shop. Thomas was finally identified by both wife and husband as the customer in their shop, but after much hesitation, end quote. So basically, the prosecution went into this double murder trial with a lot of circumstantial evidence. So in October of 1987, both Dr. Thomas Algen and Dr. Tiet Herm were arrested. And these 2 men said they barely knew each other, right? They had worked together for, I believe, a period of 18 months between 1980 and 1981. They'd worked at the same place. They were colleagues. They knew of each other. Yes, they had sort of a friendly relationship where Dr. Algen felt that it was appropriate to invite Tiet and his girlfriend over to his house for dinner. But it wasn't like they talked all the time. It wasn't like they saw each other all the time. They didn't really live close to each other. And these men were like, yeah, we know of each other and we've, hung out socially, but we're not accomplices in murder by any means. But either way, both of these men were arrested. And basically the prosecution is going to go into this double murder trial with a lot of circumstantial evidence and the testimony of a then 5-year-old child who would be testifying about something that she remembered happening when she was only 2 years old. They also had the testimony of the married couple who owned the photo shop. And on top of the murder charges for Catrine Costa that both of these doctors faced, Dr. Teet Harm was also charged with the murder of his wife, since reportedly police had found a picture of Catrine amongst Harm's things. There was a picture of her lying dead in her coffin. And we have this picture. We've seen this picture because it was on the front page of papers. But there are also some sources that say Harem had a picture of Catrine in the last moments of her life, which I take to mean that a photo was snapped while she was being strangled, but still alive, before Harem called the police. But so much of the source material is not in English, so it's hard to tell if that's true or not. Now, Dr. Thomas Algene also faced another charge, that of abusing his daughter, Karen. Karen took the witness stand and told a horrified jury what she had witnessed 3 years prior, saying, quote, "They threw the head away and then the lady was chopped up," end quote. And even though there was zero physical evidence tying either of these men to any murders, they were both found guilty. And those who support them claim that it was the fault of the police and the press who spread sensationalized rumors that painted the picture of two evil doctors who achieved excitement from killing, cutting, and then consuming the flesh and blood of their victims, with many media outlets referring to the two men as vampires. There were also rumors that still persist to this day on certain blogs and forums that Dr. Teet Harem was the head of some secret medical society devoted to cannibalism and necrophilia. We also have to remember that this case occurred during the height of satanic panic, and this mass psychosis of satanic panic was not reserved to the United States. It raged through many other countries, including Sweden. So it is crazy to me because they tested the hairs found on the blue towel by Catrine Costa's remains. Those hairs did not match either Algene or Harem. They didn't find any DNA or any evidence in Harem's car as far as DNA, hair, blood, bodily fluids, nothing like that. And they didn't find any evidence that Dr. Harem or Dr. Algene had ever met or had any interactions with Catrine Costa. There was that one report from Harem's mother-in-law where she said that she recognized Catrine from her daughter Catherine's funeral, but that might not have been true at all. It just might be an angry mother-in-law who definitely believes that Harem had something to do with her daughter's death, and so she's either creating things to make it seem more accurate, or she's just spinning a narrative that fits what her eventual motive is, which is to have Harem go to prison. It doesn't matter what it's for as long as he goes to prison and he's, paying in some way for his crimes. But these two men were found guilty with basically zero evidence. And after they were found guilty, Dr. Harem and Dr. Algene were set to receive a sentence of life in prison. But then members of the jury started giving media interviews, and this led to a mistrial being declared because they hadn't been sentenced yet. However, the appeals court, in a very sort of out-of-character move, they informed the prosecution, hey, you can try these two guys again, but if you do in fact go down the path of bringing them to a second trial and these two doctors are found guilty again, their guilty conviction most likely will not hold up on appeal, right? So they're saying if they're found guilty and then Dr. Harem and Dr. Algene and their lawyers file an appeal, most likely we will have to find that the guilty conviction is going to get thrown out. So the chief prosecutor at that time, Anders Helen, felt that it would be the best move to just drop the charges altogether, and he sort of announced that he was going to do that. But then people went crazy, and public pressure forced his hand to schedule another trial. There was a woman, she was a psychotherapist and a very intense feminist. Her name was Hannah Olsen. She began making a lot of noise. She was writing articles in every paper claiming the accused men had been protected by an oppressive patriarchal society, and once again the voices of abused and victimized women had been silenced. And this really stemmed from the removal of the testimony of the sex workers who had encountered Dr. Harem during the first trial. The prosecution, I guess, had decided not to include these sex workers during the first trial, And Olson pointed to derogatory statements that the head prosecutor, Anders Hallen, had made to the media about these women, these sex workers, where he alluded to the fact that he didn't believe they were super reliable witnesses due to, the amount of men they saw on an everyday basis, as well as their known and frequent drug use. So a second trial was set for the summer of 1988 because there was just so many voices, screaming like, you can't just let these men go free. They did this. They were found guilty. They were let off on a technicality. We need justice. So against what the prosecution wanted to do, they set a second trial. And this time, Dr. Teet Harem and Dr. Thomas Algin were found not guilty, and they were released. Now, the Swedish National Board of Health and Welfare had been brought on to investigate the circumstances of Catrine de Costa's death, and they said that not only could her cause of death not be determined, but it could also not be established that she had died under suspicious circumstances, which, listen, I'm not sitting here telling you that I know for a fact that these two doctors were guilty and this was a miscarriage of justice and they should be rotting behind bars. I don't necessarily believe that. My opinion is also split. We're going to talk about that in a second. But what does actually blow my mind is what? Catrine was found cut up and her head and organs were missing. Did she cut herself up? Did her ghost wander off with her own head and gallbladder? What? How can you say her death isn't necessarily suspicious? This is not an accidental death. This is not something she did to herself. What are you talking about? Now, another thing that is strange is the judge in this second trial told both men that he was kind of pissed off about this whole situation. He was like, I understand that there's not enough evidence to prove that you guys murdered Catrine de Costa, but it's my belief that you both took part in the dismemberment of her body. But since that's not a murder charge, the statute of limitations for that crime, which was, tampering with human remains, that statute of limitations had expired. So there was nothing he could do. He had to let them go. And he made this very clear. And once again, supporters of these two men are often going to cite what this judge said as a reason that these two men, even though they were found not guilty and released, their lives were ruined because in 1991, both of their licenses to practice medicine were revoked, and the Supreme Administrative Court refused to hear their appeals to get their licenses back. In 1999, Harem and Algin both filed an appeal to try and have their case reopened because they had some credible evidence, I guess, that Catrine de Costa was seen by multiple people alive and well after June 10th, 1984, which is not saying that those remains did not belong to her because we know they did, but it's saying that she wasn't killed on that day, that even though maybe her mother hadn't heard from her or her fellow colleagues in the red light district hadn't seen her, it didn't mean that she was dead yet, that she had died at some later point before that July 18th date when the remains surfaced for the first time. So they're saying we have evidence not only that Catrine de Costa was alive after the Pentecost holiday, but there's also reports that the police had identified a new potential suspect in Catrine's murder and that the police were currently looking into that person. But the doctors were denied a new trial in 2001 with the court stating that any evidence about a different perpetrator was not strong enough. And here's the thing. It appears there actually is strong evidence that someone entirely different may have been to blame for what happened to Catrine de Costa, and maybe even what happened to some of these other women who were found dead in 1984. This person's name was Stanislaw Gornerka. He was a butcher by trade. And get this. Just a few months, I think 2-3 months before Catrine was murdered, Stanislaw had been released from a psychiatric facility. Why had he been in that facility to begin with? Well, because in 1974, Stanislaw killed a woman, cut up her body, and put the pieces of her body into garbage bags, except for her head, which was never found. The police were aware that in the summer of 1984, Stanislaw Gornerka was seen hanging around Stockholm's red light district. But even though he didn't have an alibi for June 10th or 11th of 1984, he was for some reason ruled out as a suspect. Multiple sources also report that Stanislaw Gornerka's name was found in Catrine's diary, meaning he was most likely a regular client of hers, or at least he had seen her and paid for her services more than once. However, Stanislaw passed away in 1987, and so we'll never know whether he was responsible or not. But the timing does completely make sense and add up. And he had the same MO, right? And the murdered and dismembered women stopped popping up after his death in 1987. So what's going on with that? Now, here's what I'm thinking. I don't necessarily believe that Dr. Teet Harem and Dr. Thomas Elgin had anything to do with what happened to Catrine de Costa or any of these other women. I think that they were both weird. I think that Dr. Harem probably was responsible for his wife's murder, and I think that Dr. Thomas Elgin probably did behave inappropriately with his young daughter, but there was absolutely no evidence that they had anything to do with Catrine, and it was just kind of a public response to seeing two men that were sketchy, were creepy, didn't have the best or most normal sexual preferences, and they were out for blood. The public was out for blood. The media did sensationalize it. There's no evidence that anyone ever said these two men drank the blood and ate the flesh of their victims. It was all just sensationalized, and we know what happens when the media sensationalizes things. It's hard to tell the difference between fact and fiction. But at the end of the day, these two men were never able to work again. They continue trying to get their medical licenses back. They continue trying to get jobs because they were both smart, good doctors. You know, when I say good doctors, I mean like good at their jobs, not like good people. I wouldn't have enough information about them to say that, but they couldn't get a job, and they always had this suspicion hanging over them. I, of course, am unable to say with 100% certainty that they were not responsible, but I just feel in my gut that they probably didn't have anything to do with it, and the Stanislaw Gornecka guy is way more good for this crime than these two doctors, considering he had committed a similar crime just a few years prior, and what happened to Catrine happened just within months of him being released from the psychiatric facility that he was put in because of the crime he committed. It's the MO matches up, the timing matches up, everything matches up. And for some reason, the police ignored him as a suspect. Why? I'm not sure. Maybe because they were already on the trail of Dr. Teet Harem. Maybe because there was so much public pressure to solve this case because people were afraid, because the horrific nature of these crimes had shocked them and they wanted the police to do something. You know, the typical reasons why the police often put the wrong people behind bars. But at the end of the day, their lives were ruined. And if they are innocent, that is a miscarriage of justice, along with the miscarriage of justice of whoever did kill Catrine de Costa and all of these other women not being held responsible. But let me know what you think about this case in the comment section. I'm very interested to find out what your perception is of it. Were Dr. Teet Harem and Dr. Thomas Elgin just like kind of weird, sketchy, creepy guys? Or were they potentially evil murderers? Were they part of some medical society that, you know, ate women's flesh? Or were they just kind of odd people, maybe neurodivergent, and nobody really understood that at the time? What do you think? Let me know. But before we wrap up, we have to do 2024's first ever Stephanie Small Business Showcase. And I'm so excited because after last video, so many of you sent me your small businesses. I already have a list of small businesses that I'm working with, and I'm really pumped to tell you about today's small business. So today's small business is brought to us by Layla White. She says her small business is Soaps by Layla, although it's way more than just soap. She says she makes bath and body products for the whole family: shower steamers, bath bombs, lotions, lip products, shampoo bars, beard products, men's soaps, and more. She says that she is at Soaps by Layla on all social platforms, and that's Soaps by Lela, so you can follow her there. But she does have a website, and let me tell you, when I clicked on her website, I immediately was like, oh, wow, this is like a legit website. I love the website. Websites are important. They have to be aesthetically pleasing. They can't be, for me at least, like too muddled, too confusing. It kind of has to look nice and make me feel like, ooh, I like this, I need this. But this is a beautiful website. So shout out to Layla. Congrats. I love it. It starts off and it just says handmade bath and body products made in small batches, not mass produced in a factory. So on Layla's Facebook page, she says, turn your dreams into a reality. I started small on a little island table in my kitchen. My very first vendor event was one table with very few items. I had a notebook to keep track of sales. Now my events are 4 tables with so many varieties of products. We often have 2 to 3 phones checking out people at one time. I also have products in over 5 stores / boutiques / spas in the upstate South Carolina area. I even have a wholesale customer in Illinois. Never give up on your dreams. Keep reaching for the stars. Success is real. Just believe in yourself. I love this. I love this for you, Layla. This is amazing. It really makes me happy to see people succeeding and encouraging others. But so basically they have lip scrubs, which I love lip scrubs. I use them several times a week, and they come in these so cute little tins. I love them. She has all different flavors, I guess you could say. Bubblegum, Cherry Kiss, Fruit Loops, Mango Madness, Pineapple Colada, Strawberry Sorbet, and they just look so cute, so aesthetically pleasing. We also have the Tim McGraw Charcoal Soap, the Pop It Heart, which looks like it is a bath bomb, and it's shaped like a heart, like one of those poppets that your kids use. Super cute heart-shaped poppet-style bath bomb scented in green apple. Amazing. They have goat's milk soap, lotion and body butter, a bunch of different bath bombs besides the one I just told you about. They have a mermaid tail bath bomb. It's only $6, by the way. Okay, so if anybody goes to Lush to get your bath bombs, this bath bomb's only $6. They have a donut bath bomb, which is out of stock, which means it's probably popular. So go check that out. A lotus flower bath bomb. Ooh, a bubble and shower steamer basket. Adorable. They have cow bath bombs, unicorn ones, dinosaurs, sunflowers. These are beautiful. I love bath bombs. Bella, my daughter, loves bath bombs. They also have shaving and beard stuff, which is great. They've got a beard oil, a shave soap, whipped shave cream, and a beard balm, all packaged beautifully, aesthetically pleasing. And she's just got a bunch of other stuff on here. Body scrubs, which I love, hemp sugar scrub, coffee scrub, whipped sugar scrub, mechanic scrub, which I don't know what that means, but it's probably for men who work in like mechanics and they get like oil and stuff and grease on their skin and it's hard to get off. Yeah. So it says, introducing our Mechanics and Gardeners Hand Scrub, a powerful and rejuvenating solution for hardworking hands crafted with care. This luxurious scrub is designed to cleanse, exfoliate, and revitalize your skin, leaving your hands feeling refreshed and rejuvenated. This is awesome. So much stuff here. A complexion scrub. Amazing. So go check out Soaps by Layla, which remember, they have so much more than soaps. I know I will be, because there's many men in my life that could use a beard oil for sure. There's many people in my life who love bath bombs. And personally for me, I'm a big lip and body scrub person, and I am going to be investing in many of these products. Go check Layla out. Tell her congratulations for making herself a success, even though she just started out, making stuff at home on her kitchen island. Tell her what a good job she's doing. Tell her how cool her stuff is. Tell her how freaking amazing her website looks, because it does. And I will link everything below, including her socials and her website that, once again, is beautiful and so professionally done. And I love it. It was soothing for my brain, which is very rarely soothed. So thank you everybody so much for being here. Thank you for continuing to submit your small businesses. It makes me very happy. It makes me feel very connected to you, to look into them, see what you're up to, see what you've done with your lives, and hopefully, bring you some new customers, because if we all support each other, we don't need anything else. We don't need anyone else. We just need ourselves. Okay? The Harlequins, we've got it down. We've got it covered. I love you guys all so much. Don't forget to like the video if you liked it. Share it if you think it's worth sharing. Subscribe if you haven't already. Subscribe, okay? So that you can see more videos when I post them. I love you guys so much. And stay kind, stay beautiful, stay safe. And I'll see you very, very soon.
Straight down, and that river runs deep, the mountains get steep, and the voices getting too loud. All these feelings I've buried, it's looking like a cemetery. They're coming back from the grave, calling out my name, better say I Hail Mary. Well, you don't know to let it go. I got blood, blood on the strings, blood, blood on the strings, blood, blood on the strings. Thin plates on my face don't bleed. Got blood, blood on the strings, blood, blood on the strings, blood, blood on the strings. Lord knows it's been a rough week. Yeah, I'm channeling my son house, 'cause I gotta let these blues out. So I reach 40X, make a holler back. Ooh, Lord, I'm feeling good now. Yeah, I'm pounding on them steel strings. Yeah, it's looking like a crime scene. With my fingers going numb, looking all of this blood. You better call the police. Well, you don't know how deep it goes until it's getting you slow.